this gospel I read you this morning, I also read part of it in Araman because I wanted you to realize that it was the same gospel that you heard last Sunday at the Vesper service, at the Agape Vespers of Pascha. How many of you heard it last week? That's what I know. That's what I'm disappointed in. That all of you didn't raise your hand because you weren't here. But the gospel goes up to that point. And for those of you who were here and you heard it, then you would say to yourselves, I'm kind of down. That wasn't a very good resurrectional gospel for Thomas to say, unless I put my finger into your hands and in the place of the nails and put my hand in your side, I won't believe, and you're sent home. But today, it says on the 8th day, Thomas was there when the Lord came back. And he goes, here I am, Thomas, go ahead. Put your fingers in my hands, put your hand on my side. And he didn't do it. He says, oh my Lord and my God. And what did the Lord say to him? Blessed are those who don't see, but believe. Who is that? Obviously. Seeing is believing. We all say that. Seeing is believing. I'm sure you've all heard these stories about the college professor and the student, or the communist, the general and the private, or the commissar and the peasant, or the scientist and the priest. They're all basically the same. The professor stands up one day and he said, there is no God, because you can't see him. You can see me. You can see each other. You can see the classroom. You can see the school. You can see the creation. Can anyone see God? No. So the student answered him, well, we see the professor. We see the classroom. We see the school. We see each other. Does anybody see the professor's mind? And everybody said, no, then he must not have one. The other one is, during the communist era, they used to send out scientists, professors, to village churches, where the priest was a humble priest, like me, not very well educated. And he would give this big dissertation about why there's no God, all the scientific facts, all the evidence. And the poor priest would be listening to this. And he would get up, and you know what he would say? Christ is risen. And everybody would roar back, indeed he is risen. And he would sit down. You see, that we don't need evidence for believing. But there is plenty of evidence. And there's more evidence about Christ's resurrection than about many other things that take place in history. Even about the Roman emperors and the Roman Empire. These stories about them were written hundreds of years afterwards. These stories that we hear about Jesus' resurrection and about his crucifixion were written by the apostles very few short years after his resurrection and witnessed by all of the apostles. How many apostles were there? God bless you. How many apostles were there altogether? No. 14. How? There were 12 chosen. Judas did himself in, so they had to choose another one. And they chose Matthias, and made 13. Jesus himself picked who? Yeah, but after his resurrection. Paul, remember? He knocked him off his horse. So there were 14 apostles. Of those 14, Judas did himself in, and John died a natural death, an old man, maybe 100 years old. All the others were martyred. They were all martyred for the faith. Now I ask you, are you willing to die for Christ? Okay. If he were stolen, body were stolen, like the people said, and he didn't really rise from the dead, would you be willing to die for Christ? You would? I wouldn't. Not if he didn't really rise. I wouldn't. But those apostles all died because not only did they believe it, because because it was true. They were there and they saw it. And they saw Jesus after his resurrection. They saw him. They touched him. They fed him. And there were 500 people besides the apostles who saw him. There was no doubt. This is evidence that we don't have from anyone else. Buddha died, Muhammad died, Confucius died, Lao Tzu died. They all died and they don't even claim to be resurrected. Jesus died and he was resurrected and people saw him. And he stayed with them for 40 days just to make sure that enough people saw him. The people of Jerusalem, the people of Galilee, because he traveled throughout the area. He went to the Sea of Galilee and he went to Jerusalem, and they all saw him. And they didn't believe it. But it was Jesus, and we have that evidence. So there's more evidence for Jesus' resurrection than many, many other things in the world. And yet we accept them as history or the truth. People don't like to accept Jesus' resurrection because they say, well, the gospel writers, they're making up a story. Well, it's a beautiful story, but it would have been, I believe, quickly knocked down by those who were still alive if they wrote these things, and it didn't happen. And as I said, people were willing to die for them. And not only then, but even now. There are stories from the communist era in Russia, in Romania, in Ukraine, in Albania, where people were imprisoned. And they celebrated Pascha the only way that they could. They weren't allowed to, but they would save a little bit of their rations, the bread, and of course they couldn't get water, but they would like to save their water to celebrate Pascha on the eve of the resurrection. They would save whatever wax they could get to make candles. And at midnight, on Pascha Eve, these prisons would light up with the light from their candles. And of the prisoners singing Christ is risen in their own languages. And when they came out, they would say, as joyous as Pascha is, as most beautiful when you go to the cathedral and with the patriarchs and the bishops and the priests, there was never as beautiful a Pascha as the one in prison, where they had nothing, no vestments, no glory, no icons, darkness, dampness, but they felt the joy of Jesus Christ in their hearts, of the risen Christ. And they would never, they say, forget the joy that they felt on that Pascha. We don't know what's coming into this world. We see Christians are being ridiculed, and they're being persecuted and prosecuted. The coach who kneeled to say a prayer for himself was taken to court to be fired as coach. You kneel down for the national anthem and you're a hero. If you wear a cross in a place where they don't like it, then you can be fired. But if you wear the veil, oh, that's somebody's personal liberty and right. You can't go against that. Why would Christians be persecuted? Because it's the truth, and people hate the truth. They want only their story to be told. But the truth of Christ can never be diminished, can never be taken away. It's in our hearts and in our minds. Is seeing believing? No. We have not seen and we believe. We have not seen and we believe. But I tell you something. We will see. We will see in the end. We will see him. We will face him, whether you like it or not. And he will be there. And he will say, go ahead, put your finger in went up and he ascended into heaven with the marks of the nails in his hands and in his feet, and with that spear wound in his side. And when he comes back, we'll know him by that. We'll know him by that. Christ is risen. Christos nabiat. Christos nabiat. Now I want you to say it like you really mean it. Christ is risen.